Welcome back to Finding Common Ground with Steve and Heather. Today's episode is an emotional one for me, and we will cover it more than once because there are so many foster care stories out there, locally, regionally, and across our states that need to be shared. Each one will give our audience a different perspective on what is working in foster care and maybe some of the ugly truths of things that aren't working, and that we can take a collective advocacy and going forward and trying to come up with some solutions, and we hope to address that.
In this episode today, we're going to break down an interview that we did with a young man who had spent some time in Steve's house. It was a crucial point in Tristan's life when he was in your home. He was a teenager in the foster care system, and he had mentioned that he just really wanted the normal things in life. You know, he had bounced around, but he wanted out to be in the sports team, and he wanted to make friends. And even though he had gone through multiple placements and he had found one that provided the basics, his case manager could tell that he was still lacking something, that he needed a little bit more. And he offered him the chance to do respite at your home. And before we hop into his version of that story, like from his perspective, I was hoping you could give the audience a glimpse into that beginning with Tristan, what you remember about the beginning of a story. And because I can tell you've had so many children in your home, but he has carved out a special place in your heart. When you talk about him bringing that Regents diploma to your house after he had graduated, and when you talk about him going into the military, I can see how proud you are of him. And I just would love for you to give the audience a little introduction to the person that we're going to be interviewing today.
Sure. Tristan came into our house as a respite, which is somebody who comes in to give the foster home that's maybe previous to us a break, or even the child a break. Sometimes it's done over just giving everybody a break. Sometimes it's done over behavioral breaks and things like that. If a kid has had an outburst, or like I said, the family needs a break. He came to our house from another foster home not too far away from us. I did know who that foster home was. And I also knew of Tristan from being at the office quite a bit. And they called us up one day and asked if we wanted to respite him. And I said, of course. And I got a chance to meet him that first weekend, and we spent a lot of time together. And he was so psyched to come to our house, and we were glad he did.
For those that don't know, a respite is like a temporary stay, like a sleepover for a night or something like that.
To get you out of a situation, to just kind of regroup, okay.
Yeah. So they advised doing respites. I did roughly 2 of those. One of them was at Steve's house, and it felt like such a breath of fresh air to actually be able to be a legitimate kid and teenager, being able to play video games, eat pizza, that type of stuff that wasn't very often over at the old house. And I guess that makes me sound like a bit picky and choosy about certain aspects of foster homes. But what people fail to realize is that those are kind of some of the only things that foster kids get to hold on to when going from house to house, because we never know if we're going to be staying at a house for a day, a week, a month, maybe even a year. We do not get that privileged information.
I can't imagine living that way. That's a really hard life, because we all want to know what comes next. When you're on vacation, you don't say, I guess I'll go home when I feel like it. Like, you have a plan and you know what to expect and how many things to pack and how long you'll be there. And if you didn't like the hotel, it's not a big deal because you're only going to be there a few days. But when you're in a foster care situation and you really don't know, I know some kids will be told, don't worry, this is temporary. You'll be home in a few weeks or you'll be home in a few days. but the scenario really can change really quickly depending on what happens in court. And do you feel comfortable talking a little bit about why you ended up in foster care to begin with?
So I ended up in foster care mainly due to my own kind of like self-admittance to foster care.
Steve, before Tristan jumps into his full story here, I just want I want to pause and talk with the audience for a minute and let them know what a big deal this is for Tristan to open up like this.
Exactly, Heather. This usually doesn't happen when they're in care. He was always, I think, above and beyond his maturity level of most kids coming in through the foster care system. I think he first came to our house. I want to say, I think it was like 12 years old, 13 years old, and he had a good sense of what he wanted in life. And what happens is in foster care, you don't get a choice. Like he said, there is no choice. You wind up in a foster home that's not of your choosing. You're wind up in a foster home that you may not want to be at. You might wind up in a foster home where it's just a different set of lifestyles that you are used to or that you want. And with Tristan, who is kind of very active, he wanted to be a teenager. I sense from what he said and some things, many conversations over the years that he wasn't getting that there. And look, most of the time, these children want a sense of belonging. They want to know that they belong somewhere. And I think it's hard to do that if we don't ask the kid, where they want to be, if they have any say in any of this. And by giving them the say, and maybe on a respite, and he can tell the case planner if he liked it or not, is pretty powerful and it's empowering to him.
And isn't it cool how he said he admitted himself into the system? It's like he owned it. Instead of saying I was ripped out of my home or, people didn't do what they were supposed to do, he has such a great perspective on it. He knew he needed out of that situation. And I imagine there was anger and I imagine there was embarrassment. But at the same time, he is empowered now. And the fact that he can just speak so freely about these things, and the audience will hear him speak about his father. And it takes a big person to still have respect for somebody when they dropped you off at his aunt's house, right? Like he doesn't let that define his relationship with his father. He sees that as something that needed to happen. And even though the circumstances weren't perfect, he still wants a relationship. And that's important for everybody to hear too, because sometimes we just assume that, we write those people off and we move on. But he's an interesting case because he was able to do it a different way. And I think that his story is really important to highlight.
On the same night that we get picked up from the airport and back at her house, he disappears middle of the night.
Wow.
And while today I have an actual good relationship with him, there's always going to be that little nagging in the back, like, is he just going to up and disappear again?
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think a lot of children that are growing up in foster care have that thought in their head, whether most likely it's not something that they did wrong, right? But in your mind, you play the situations over and over again, and you try to figure out how you ended up in this situation and how you can get to a better situation. And that's either going to highly motivate someone to do really well, or it could break them. And I think that the placements that kids bounce from here and there, and that really makes a difference. What do you think was different about Steve's place? What stood out to you? You said that you could be just a kid there. You didn't have to worry about other things. You could be a teenager.
Yeah, so let's pause here before he answers, because I think it's important to mention that Tristan has bounced around a lot. He's going to talk about briefly some of the places he's been. And then after that, I will talk about some of the places I know that he was in once he came to our area. it's interesting because Tristan could have been a victim. I love the fact that what you said, Heather, that he doesn't define himself as a victim. Instead of complaining, he, you know, drudged his way through all of this. And he was a young kid at the time. I think it's pretty telling.
When he was talking about his aunt, he had mentioned that his cousin has autism and that he really did pretty well in school, but that when he was home, you know, that's when they saw some more of the behaviors. And me and Steve understand that. And some people in that situation, if they've been bounced around a whole bunch and then they had to deal with something else, would have been upset about it. They would have felt like, you know, that's just something extra now that I have to deal with. But I agree with you, Steve. What he says about that experience is really beautiful.
Listen to what he says.
A certain level of resilience to, I guess, hard times like this. Very emotional, stressful times, because this wasn't the first time that I had been kind of ripped away from family.
Right.
Prior to me living with my dad, I had lived with my mom. And up until about me being 7 years old, things were relatively fine. It was just being a kid. But, pardon my language, but shit hit the fan really fast when they found out that my uncle was being that type of uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And things were going on behind closed doors.
I'm so proud of Tristan for talking about the abuse he endured. You have to be pretty courageous to stand up and talk about it. There's people that are even adults that won't speak about some of the things that happened, but I think it was part of the healing process for him that he's able to talk about it. He went into explaining his family could have helped him through it, but they were embarrassed. Also, sometimes some parents and some family members just aren't capable of handling situations like this, and why other kids wind up in foster care too.
Yeah.
The people that should have stood up for you, it sounds like, didn't really have the capacity for it. They weren't sure what the right thing to do was. And that's an important thing for our audience to hear. Because sometimes when you hear about foster care, you assume the mom, you know, that she's standing on the street corner or she's shooting up and that she's really, really evil. You know, they paint some of the biological parents out to be very bad people. And I'm not saying it's not true sometimes. But sometimes it's just somebody who's just not sure what to do, and they don't have the skills to be an adequate parent, especially when the shit hits the fan, like you said. When that situation arises, people either rise to the moment or they fall apart. And despite the fact that you had these experiences that led up to Steve's house, that where people kind of let you down, you seem very well adjusted. And as soon as you saw Steve come on camera, you smiled. You had a very warm relationship. I can tell. I can see it. I can feel it. Why do you think that some foster kids can go through all that trauma and end up like you, like pulling themselves together and being resilient, and other kids can't? Do you have any idea?
I would say that mostly comes down to the skills that they get from being around other people their age. It is so much easier to be able to have like a 7-year-old talk to like 7 or 8-year-old or even a 9-year-old. Children have a lot of sociability around them. Mm-hmm. It's that innocence about them that makes their answers and their advice that they want to give just pure of heart.
Right.
They're not.
They're not adults. They haven't let you down, right?
They don't have the intention of trying to lead you astray or lie to you. They genuinely want what's best for you.
Yeah, Tristan, I've had a lot of children in foster care feel this way. In fact, I know they do after talking to so many along our paths. where the people were supposed to stand up for them and protect them and didn't. Their own families failed them, so of course they wonder whether others are going to fail them also. Some foster kids don't recover from that at all. I've seen it personally, and it's no wonder that because of the backgrounds of any of these kids making it through. It's why it's so heartwarming to see somebody like Tristan be able to come through that. I don't think anybody's ever unscathed, but he's, like you said, Heather, he's pretty resilient and made it through.
And you think about those clinical settings that we place them in where it's just so artificial. Sometimes it's in the same building that, they had to go to when they were removed from their home. And it takes a lot for somebody with trust issues to open up to a stranger. And I really am impressed with Tristan. And the fact that he said, being with other kids, that they genuinely want what's best for you, that's something for us all to think about when we're working with anyone who's going through a hard time. Finding people who can peer or mentor them or talk them through a situation that they've lived through too. That shared experience is very powerful. In the next clip we're going to watch, he talks about some of the supports that are available for people in foster care. I just want to point out to the audience that he hasn't been in foster care for a while now. I would say not 10 years, but almost, right? So when he's talking about some of these things, there may be new and improved parts, or it could be more strained now because, as we all know, after the pandemic, some of the systems that we really rely on are even more overburdened than they were beforehand. So I just think it's important for us all to keep in mind that he isn't fresh out of foster care. He's been out for a while, but this is his opinion. That, sometimes the agency workers, they really want to help, but they're getting tied down with the paperwork. They're kind of getting blocked. They feel like they can't do the things that feel right because it's not billable or it doesn't check the box that they're supposed to check. And I was really kind of impressed with his ability to appreciate the position those workers were in instead of being mad at them too. I see a lot of people with anger, and he's let that part go.
Well, let me get back to my original point. When I had just gotten out of the foster care system, I went to live with my aunt Carol in Alabama. And for the first month and a half, I was just so sick because I was cleaning myself of those garbage medication. In certain people, yes, it is better to have the medications. For my situation in and of itself, it was not. A
lot of medicines are overprescribed, for sure.
Yes. But I know in certain situations, it is necessary to help them function. But for that month and a half, it was just agony. I was bedridden or just wanting to not have this medication floating around in my body. And that kind of, I don't want to call it torture, but that's kind of what it feels like. They will diagnose meds to people who don't need them and let them just live with the effects.
Do you think it's easier for them than trying to break down what happened or talk through the feelings? I think sometimes people think if I take this pill, it won't matter how crappy things were growing up or how many traumatic things I went through or how many homes I've had to live in. It's like, I don't think they have a bad intention. It's just they aren't thinking it through. They aren't thinking about, well, if I take this med, I have this side effect. Oh, you have that side effect. Then they prescribe a different med for that side effect. And oh, that one has a side effect. And now I can't sleep. And now I have to take a sleeping pill. And now I mean, they all add up. And I agree with you. I think sometimes, whether it's a good intention or not, they are we call it in the medical field, like they're snowing you. They're quieting you down. They're trying to keep you calm, so that maybe you look more socially acceptable. But I can't picture looking at you right now why they thought they needed to do that. Now I know you're more mature now. You're an adult, but it's hard for me to grasp
Heather,
why we're doing that to people.
I can probably answer that. Unfortunately, in the foster care system, too many times they try to medicate the behavior and not understand what the behavior is even about in the first place. And they go and medicate it. And the problem I have with it is almost every kid that comes in our house is on the same med. So it's telling to me that it's on the same med. And I'm going to list one of them, which is Adderall, which is a favorite one for everybody coming through foster care, getting on it. The problem with that is we had a national shortage of Adderall a year ago. And one of the reasons is because so many kids are getting this pumped into their system. And then what happens is they get used to it. So what do they have to do? They have to increase the dosage. So instead of 1.0 milligrams, now you're on 3.0 milligrams. When you get a little older, it's even more. And most of the time,
it's more taxing on your body, right? I mean,
multiple
all of these
meds.
things.
And Tristan's exactly right. Most of the time, we don't think they need the meds. Tristan knows I try to discontinue them if I can. But there's times that they won't. Back when Tristan was in my house, they wouldn't let us. We had to give that, and we knew it wasn't good for them. But there's not much you can do when a psychologist is saying that we have to prescribe this med, and it's usually not. They didn't come in our house, and we didn't ask them for the med.
What's crazy to me, Steve, is not only does tapering back medications and taking some away completely save the state money, but it also makes the person feel better if they're taking meds that they don't need. And why people block that, why people get in the way and just pull out that prescription pad and they're so willing to write another script, it's beyond me. But I love the fact that you would push back and that you are looking at the person in front of you and not all those list of diagnoses. Sometimes we get so lost in that paperwork and we start to believe it. And I think whether you have a foster child in your life or it is your child that sits in front of you or the neighborhood kid, look at the person, not the diagnosis, not what the doctor says, not what those experts are telling you, because when you're looking at a person, it's when you really see them and you see what they need. And people don't always appreciate that, especially the systems that are supposed to support us. And this next topic that I want to dive into is a little more delicate, and you can speak as freely as you would like about it. But I know that sometimes in your situation, you've had almost 200 kids in your home, you get some blowback. You're in court and you're advocating for kids, and it doesn't always go smoothly. And sometimes you ruffle some feathers. Sometimes you're shining a light on something that they don't really want everybody to know about. And I know from what you've told me, you're not attacking a specific person or even an agency. You can understand that there's this bureaucracy to this. This is like a mountain of stuff, and you're trying to dig through it and show them better ways that they could do things. Let us know that some of the things you're facing right now with the kids that are in your home right now.
Yeah, look, I can probably, it's not just even right now. It's kind of been that way for quite a while. Look, when we get a child, and because we're a therapeutic foster home, which means we get more high needs kids with disabilities, autism, PTSD, and all that kind of stuff. They usually come with the meds already attached to them, diagnoses already attached to them. But, we've had kids here that go back, their paperwork goes back 13 years. And nobody can tell us, because there wasn't any oversight, why he was on a seizure med, why another kid was on some other kind of med, why why this kid from, respite, or this kid from another agency, why they're on specific things. And when we start asking those questions and they don't have the answers to them, is usually when I can usually start diving into it more, into why. And then I go back medically and try and find out why. And the particular child that goes where it goes way back, I usually try and start local, try and find a new pediatrician to get a fresh set of eyes. I'll look at a neurologist, a psychologist, and see why this child might have been on a med 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And then we can start looking at why he's on it and if it's even needed. And usually when I can't provide an answer, that's usually when I can start DCing, which is discontinuing the med, and try and get him and see how the child reacts without it. And what I've found over the years that most of the children that I've worked with, and it's not just foster care, don't need all the meds they're on. But if there's no oversight and there's nobody checking, and it's hard to check because just Tristan's case, he was in multiple foster homes, multiple respite homes, multiple facilities and residential placements, and nobody's checking what the other one did. There might be a little bit of a paper
15
trail.
years ago, we didn't even, I'm sorry but like 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even have electronic records. So doctors weren't sharing information in the same way they can now. Right. So when we think of his case, I kind of get it, right? But now we're talking 2024. Now they have Rios. They can look and they can say, okay, even if you were in Alabama, this is what happened. And now you're in Louisiana and now you're over here. They can figure it out and they know they can do the trail and look, but they don't because they're moving so quickly. And that's one thing that people have to understand about our healthcare system right now. It's so overloaded. And if you have a child with Medicaid, particularly, those physicians are not getting reimbursed at the same rate as if you had private insurance. And so for an audience to have an understanding of what that means for the patient, for the foster care child or the person with a disability, we're often rushed. We're the person that probably needs the extra time and we get less time because let's say it costs the doctor $120. Okay. They're going to get you in the room. They had to pay the secretary to schedule you. They had to, have the assistant come in and take, the tech do your vitals and they had to pay them. And then they had to get paid for their time. They end up getting paid like $60 when it costs them $120 for the appointment. So we feel rushed in those situations. And sometimes a parent that doesn't have those advocacy skills doesn't know they can say we're not done or we have more questions. And I think that's an art that you have fine-tuned over the years, that you can say, hey, doc, this doesn't make sense to me. Answer me this or tell me why we're doing this. But let's take it one more step. Sometimes we can talk to those doctors and we can get those kind of things changed. But when you are in court right now and you're fighting for kids who've been stuck in the system and they're getting placed in facilities, and they'll be there until they age out, why are you getting the pushback then? Because you would think New York State would be so grateful that there are people like you who are following these kids from court case to court case, court date to court date, and standing up for them. What is the blowback about? Like, you're trying to adopt 3 children right now. You're taking them out of the foster care system. Is that it? I just can't. It's hard for me to understand why they're challenging a person as like yourself who's trying to do the right thing and show these kids that they matter and that people care about them.
Yeah, Heather, it's complicated. It's certainly changed over time. And this is my personal take on it is that, my personal take is, that everybody's got their agenda. Unfortunately, foster care is run like a business now. It's not really what it used to be, in my opinion. And what happens is, the case planner and the agency will have a position, and then the court will have a position, and the county attorney will have a position. And what happens is they very seldom for a long time did not have foster parents go to court. And our take sometimes is just different because we live with these children all the time, 24/7. I've had numerous occasions over the years where my opinion was different, but we always wanted to get our take in there because I thought it was important that the whoever the judge was had all the information on his bench before he decided a case. And I just thought for a while, the reason I go is because for a while there, I just didn't think it was being presented all the information that you need. And I'll give you a quick example, and it happened where, somebody might call a school and say, gee, I wonder how Johnny's doing in the school and, in his class. And they might not even get the teacher. They might get somebody else, and they'll say, yeah, he's doing good. But when he's living in somebody's home like mine, and I have the current report card that I might have just got a couple days ago, and if the child is failing 2 subjects, it just tells a different story than what the judge does and what he considers as far as putting supports around the child that help. It's just part of it is a lot. Look, it's a bureaucracy. It's overloaded. These case planners have a lot of people on their caseloads. The people at the county building have a lot of people on their caseloads, and I just don't think they have the time to do the right to do the right by the children. And why I think it's important foster children go to court.
I would agree. And I remember you telling a story recently that there was a young man that you were willing to bring into your home, but they were insisting that he go to a facility. And for people who can't fathom that, why would we say to any child that they would be better off in this congregate group living situation that feels very clinical, and not want them to be in a home, especially when there's a parent standing in front of them. And I know in that particular case, and we can't go over very specific details because I do understand it's court and there's a lot of things that need to remain anonymous and protected, but it would break my heart if I was that judge and I heard that young man pleading for him to be able to go to your house or go to another placement instead of going into a facility. And I'm sure that keeps you up at night, just thinking about those kids that are crying out and asking for help. I think Tristan's story helps because we can see that even when things are tough, that people can get through it. There are people who are resilient like him, who've processed it. But for the kids that aren't having that opportunity, I think that's why the caseworkers are so overwhelmed. They're checking boxes. They're not checking the people. They're looking at their lists. They're doing what their job requires them to do. But we've forgotten what the mission is. We've forgotten that we're fellow human beings. So the rest of the interview with Tristan is very insightful. It's very powerful. And so while at the beginning of this episode, we've broke down all these different segments, some of it was because we were speaking about things that needed to be protected and stay private. So we intentionally removed some portions of this interview, not because they weren't powerful, not because they weren't important, but because we're trying to respect people's privacy that are in this system, because they deserve that, right? We need to do that for them. But I think the remaining portion of this interview can be played as is for our audience. But before we do that, is there anything else you want to say about what's happening right now with you and the foster children and the adoption process that maybe we hadn't touched on during our interview?
No, look, I think there's always a better way. And I think the foster care system is no different than a lot of agencies in the states across the country. There's a lot of things that can be done better. And I don't know if there's a lot of opportunities to do it because there's so much bureaucracy, there's so many regulations, and they keep going back to that bureaucracy and regulations with everything they do. And things change over time. And, I'll give you one quick, for instance, before we talk to Tristan. And I remember the time when our children, my daughter would go outside with all her friends on a trampoline, and it wasn't even that long ago where foster kids could not go out. It was a regulation that they could not go on a trampoline. So they had to look out the window and watch my daughter and her friends play. Now, fortunately, that one was changed, but there's a lot of other regulations that probably need to be looked at. And I'm looking at working with some legislators across the state and trying to address some of those other ones that I think that are hurting our foster children.
I think that's a really good thing for us to say, because we always talk about one of our sole purposes of this show is to empower people. And whether you're in foster care or you're working with a child with a disability or whatever the case may be, there are barriers in this world, right? And sometimes there are a rule that was meant to protect people and it doesn't work anymore. It's outdated. It's like that old Victorian home that you've added on a million rooms. And now the stairs go to nowhere and the window doesn't open. We can't always just keep adding on and renovating. Sometimes we have to tear it down and start over. People are involved. So I think that's a great idea for people to think about what's actually in the way. And then, just like you, make an appointment with your local legislator. Talk to them about it. Maybe there's already legislation that's in the hopper. People, maybe they've already voted on it and they just, need the governor to sign it. Or maybe they need someone to sponsor a bill. Or maybe we need to write a new one that will override what we used to have. That is within our power as people in this country. We have that power, we have that ability. And instead of worrying, or not even worrying, instead of thinking somebody else will take care of it, us as parents, us as community members, we can take care of it. We can bring it up. So thank you for showing people that, Steve, because that's a new realization for me. One person can walk into a legislator's office, and that's what Assemblywoman Marianne Buttonshaw said in one of her interviews. She said, very often it's one person who has an idea of how to make it better that walks into her office that triggers a whole series of events, and things can change. So thank you for that. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of our conversation with Tristan. He's such an amazing person.
Sure is.
Then from my understanding, sometimes the agency that ripped you out of your home or started the process, you have to go back to that building. And I can't imagine, this is the building I do supervised visits with the person who abused me. This is the building I went to the night I was pulled from my home. And this is the building I have to go to get counseling. What can we do for kids in this situation that's different? What's creative? What's a blueprint that our audience can use if they're in that situation?
So in terms of, well, I'll actually backtrack a little bit. The situation with the prior mentioned Riley, his situation is, it is a spotlight on what is wrong with the system as it is currently. Albeit, yes, these are a couple years back and I haven't been in the foster care system since then, but when there is a very clearly abusive relationship happening at the home where the kid was taken from, and you put it into paperwork that unsupervised visits are going to be what's happening moving forward in a abusive relationship that has been documented, that's a failure.
It is.
On the system.
You're just re-traumatizing them. You're making them feel unsafe. And how bad for the foster parents must feel too, to have to bring you to a situation they know that you don't need to be in, that it's not good for you to be in. And then then the state says, or the county says, now you have to sit on this couch in this therapist's office and you have to talk about it. And you think, I don't even want to be in this building. I mean, Steve, you've talked about some creative workarounds that you've done, and you say, I'm not bringing them to that building. We're going to do something different.
Yeah, Tristan actually knows one of the teens that was in our house. It was wound up being a star halfback of our football team. Think about if him having to tell his coach, his players, his teammates that he had to go down to the agency and have therapy.
Miss practice or miss a game.
And and how embarrassing that would be. And it's unfortunate. And what I did was I argued with them. So I was blue in the face, and I finally got the therapist to come to his games. and she did his therapy right on the field after a game, after the game, by talking to him. And it was more natural than trying to force him into a situation down there that he didn't want to be in there. Let alone all the other reasons you mentioned about, him being in foster care and, pulled from his family and everything else, going back into a re-traumatized situation. And those are the kind of creative things that I continue to do. A couple of our kids in our house right now that are in foster care are receiving therapists from a third party. I don't like bringing our kids to the agency for those reasons. I just think it re-traumatizes the children. And the bigger issue is the children don't want to go down there. And where are they most comfortable? In our home. And so I'd rather them be here and get it. And we now have a third party agency that comes here for 2 of our children for therapy right in our home.
And that's a beautiful thing. And that's my training. That's my background. I go where the family or the individual is most comfortable, whether that was at the school, the daycare center, at their home, at the playground. Knowing that the person who's supporting you with your mental health is flexible is so important, because what are we teaching kids? You can only get the help if you do it this way. If you sit on this couch, if you say this thing, if you take your medicine, and it doesn't always fit so neatly. And when you're talking about kids who've been through so much chaos, we have to be flexible and we have to be creative. And I'm so glad that Tristan could tell some of his story. And Steve, I'm so happy that you're doing this kind of work and that you're role modeling for other people by sharing it on a platform like this, because some people are just like you and they think, I could probably handle that. Maybe I'll start with respite, and some people could come on the weekend when they need to move away from a situation for a little bit, and you can be that constant for them. In my mind, that seems like such an easy thing for someone to do. I mean, we bring in foreign exchange students and we have people stay at our house for extended visits all the time, right? So why not open our minds and our hearts to this idea? Because Tristan's a great example of somebody who went through a lot, but he's here now. He's a productive member of society. He's giving back, and we can't throw away people and expect them to do good things, right? We have to be good people if we want to have good people in the world.
Right. Tristan, one of the best, I don't know if I've told you this, but one of the best times I've ever had in foster care was when you showed up at my house unexpectedly one time with your Regents diploma. It made my day because you wanted to show it to me and show me that you could do it. And you did.
Mm-hmm. So what are you up to now, Tristan, all these years later?
Well, I just recently got out of the military. I had served around 2.5 years as an HR specialist. And now that I'm out and pretty much readjusting to being a civilian again, I pretty much work with my brother. He's inside right now. I work with him as a junker mover.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the most glamorous of jobs, but I mean, it's a social job. We go out.
You're making a paycheck. You're doing something people need done. I think that's great. We should have more people getting jobs. I mean, oh my gosh, how much this workforce crisis is. It's everywhere, right? I mean, anywhere you go, they're looking for people to work. And you've shown us, serving in the military, thank you. My husband was a Marine. He served in Iraq. And I'm always in awe of people who put everything on the line for everybody else. And when you think of your story, I want you to think of that even though you didn't always have everything perfect, you were still willing to fight for everything our country stands for. So thank you for that, because not everybody does that. That's a rare quality that you have. And I'd like to think that having Steve and having families like Steve's will give us hope for that kind of future where people can change things around. And that's what we want, because we all hit hard times in life. And when you're a kid, you can't fix it. You're not an adult. You don't have your own lawyer. You don't have your own payroll to pay for things. You have to rely on the kindness of strangers. And I say that a lot because it's amazing to me in some of the darkest moments that I have faced that it really was a stranger, someone I barely knew who stepped up and helped. And we can all be that person for somebody. I had a young man that went through foster care, and then he ended up in a residential facility for high behaviors that's in Rochester. And he learned how to sell drugs there, okay? Like, you just think, I can't believe that that's where we sent him to be, refined and ready for society. And then he ends up starting to deal drugs. He ended up in prison. And then when he got out of prison, someone pushed him down a flight of stairs. Now he's a quadriplegic, and he moved into a nursing home. And he lived there for 13 years. And my whole goal when I was working with him is to get him back in the community, because in my mind, everybody would want to live in the community. You wouldn't want to live in an institution. But New York State raised him, foster care, residential, prison, and now a nursing home, right? He didn't know what to do in the community. And it was really hard for me as a person on the outside who really cares about him. He comes to my house for Christmas, okay? Like, I care about him. To see him struggle like that. But I feel like I got to him too late. He was already an adult, and he'll know that I'm in his corner forever. He'll hear this podcast, he'll know I'm talking about him. But the kids, when we get them in the beginning and we can show them that they matter, I think that's what we really have to focus on, that early part, those early years, the teenage years where you're so impressionable. Because if you don't have the right surroundings, you wouldn't have ended up in the military, and you wouldn't end up being, working and doing all the things that you're doing. Steve, are there any other stories? Because I feel like we should probably finish up, but you've had so many kids come through your house, and I just want to make sure we highlight some of the failures of the system, but also some of the really good parts so that people feel hopeful.
Look, I would love to be a part of the solution to help and fix the foster care system. I am in conversations with multiple people with the state trying to fix some of this stuff. Look, the biggest thing that's hurting these children is the fact that somebody decided they did need a regulation in keeping kids in care for this long, and it's 15 to 22 months. That's a state regulation. So when I call Albany and I tell a state commissioner, gee, we have kids in our home 7, 8, 9 years, they almost fall on the floor. Because they have no idea
know that's happening.
That they don't know what's happening, and they don't, and certainly not following the regulations. And look, there's a lot of things that go into that, and there's reasons why things get postponed in court. But a lot of times they want to pinpoint this stuff on it being the court's fault. It's not what I see. I think there's just too many times these kids fall through the cracks, and they don't have the right supports around them, and a lot of foster parents don't go to court. Tristan knows that I still go to court for kids that aren't even in our home, and it's a reason. It's trying to get them out of the system. And Tristan also knows that.
And you want to show them that you're standing there with them. They're not alone. Because how scary is it to be in court all the time, right? I mean,
the longer they're in care, if they're supposed to be less than 2 years and they're in care 7, 8, 9 years, and they don't get to the right situation that can undo a lot of that stuff, they're going to age out and probably more than likely get in trouble, or they're going to wind up in a facility because nobody will adopt them. And I am 100% against facilities. Every one of these children in foster care deserve a home. Whatever that makeup of a home is, it's way better any day than trying to put them in a facility where they're lost. And we have, I'm working with kids right now in residential facilities that I'm trying to get out. Shouldn't be.
Yeah. I want to finish with the story of the young man you told me, as long as you're comfortable talking about it, because it was a funding issue. And what happened is this young man used to come to your house on the weekends. I think he lives with his grandma maybe, and she's doing the best she can, but coming to your house and hanging out with other kids and going in the autism barn and having structure just reset him for the week so that it was a little easier for him. It was a little easier for grandma. And when the funding ran out, because after a while, I guess it does, I don't understand, because he's still around and he still needed you. And then what happened? I mean, because to him, he didn't get to reset. He didn't get to go to his safe spot. And what just for an audience's sake, what happens in those situations?
Well, look, very unfortunate. We actually have a couple of those instances and are current. One of them has a grandmother. There's 5 children living with a grandmother only, all disabled, all with multiple disabilities, from autism to much more mental health issues. One has been kicked out of multiple residential placements, and this child needed us, and it came in through Life Plan, through a self-direction budget, and they did it for a while, then stopped. And the agency was billing, one agency was billing the other agency, and then when that funding stopped, we offered to take the child in for nothing, and they wouldn't let us. The second agency,
they weren't going to get a cut.
They weren't. It was a billing issue. Well, look, they're always going to tell you it's a reg because they can fall back on that, that it being a reg. But I've had conversations since that has happened with people in Albany, and they told me it could have been worked out, and it should have been worked out. And this poor kid, what we're sending him back into is an environment of, on one of the particular cases is domestic violence. Another, the other case, the kid is sitting in jail right now because he didn't get the services he needed because he wasn't allowed to come here, and he got in trouble. Mm-hmm. Something he didn't do here.
Right. I was just going to say, he probably felt abandoned again. I mean, I just go back to what Tristan said in the beginning. And when you feel like you're abandoned and that people aren't following through, that's the worst feeling. That's, and it's too bad because you were willing for him to keep coming. And I think that you have a big heart. And I think that that's why we have Tristans in the world to stand here today and tell us, foster care can work. And people need to hear that because it always gets a bad rap, but it's a very necessary thing. Things happen to parents. They could get hit by a car, or they could get in a car accident. They could get cancer. It's not always, the worst case scenario, but sometimes it is. And all of the children in that scenario that need a home and a safe place to be, we need to do better by them. We absolutely do. So, Steve, I'm so grateful for what you do. I'm grateful that you're sharing some of those systematic issues, and you're willing to sit at the table with some of the people who make the decisions and talk them through it. Because just writing, an editorial or going, and complaining at a rally and holding up a sign protesting just says that you're angry. And I think that for our audience, you have to take it to the next step and say, what's a solution I can do? What can I walk into my legislator's office and say, I know this problem is huge, but this is what I can do as one person. Do you think anybody else would do that? I mean, that's how things start. That's how you got your first few kids dropped off at the house. It wasn't formal. Just the neighborhood knew that you could handle it. And then it grew. And so thank you for what you do. Tristan, thank you so much for joining us, because this is the kind of thing we need to talk about. And I hope that everybody keeps tuning in and learning from these different stories, because we're so fortunate and we'll never run out of stories. So please join us next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was glad to be a part of this.
Tristan, I hope to see you at Christmas.
Work it out. We'll work it out.